Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to 64th session of LTI webinar. Before I introduce the moderator, let me play a video of our association and please understand what are we doing. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Dr. Deepa Mary Francis, Assistant Professor of English, Anna University, with teaching experience of 19 years. Dr. Deepa, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Shravan Kumar. Good evening to one and all present here. It's my proud privilege to introduce the resource person of today's webinar. Dr. Annie Kudiachan is here to deliver a talk on the topic Theatre in the English Language Classroom. Pretty lengthy and impressive is the curriculum vitae. Her teaching journey started at Stella Maris College in the year 1987, after which she worked at Lady Dock College, CTTE College, Ithiraj College for Women, and at present she heads the Department of English at Women's Christian College, Chennai. Her doctoral work was on the topic Generating and Communicating Responses, Linking Literary Appreciation and Language Development through Drama Praxis. And equally interesting was the topic for her MPhil research, a thematic analysis of the screenplays of Tennessee Williams. She has attended several conferences and seminars at the regional, national, and international levels in the course of her career. The paper titled Drama Praxis in English Language Learning, presented at a one-day international conference held at the University of Warwick, Great Britain in April 2019, a 3-week course that she has done on Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, offered and certified by HarvardX, an online learning initiative by Harvard University, USA, and being one of the reviewers of the 10th and 12th standard English textbooks for the revised syllabi adopted by the Department of School Education, Government of Tamil Nadu in 2019, are a few of the many feathers on her cap. She has edited the book titled Reconstructing the Gender Stereotype, for which she has joined hands with Dr. Helen Timaya of her department. She has published around 5 research papers during the past 5 years. Her profile rightly translates into the understanding that we have the right person here to talk on the topic, how dramas can be used in language classrooms. With this introductory note, I welcome Dr. Annie Kuriachin on behalf of all of you to this webinar. Ma'am, we are all ears.
Oh, thank you very much for that gracious introduction, Dr. Deepa. I would, at the outset, like to thank ELTAI for inviting me for this webinar, especially Dr. Mohan Raj, who talked to me at length about a direction that I wanted for this particular seminar, webinar. I would also like to thank Dr. Shravan Kumar and Mr. Vinod for planning it out so beautifully and so meticulously. I'd also like to thank Dr. Veena Selvam, my student long ago, but now my friend, very, very intelligent and academic, strongly academic friend that I have in her. So thank you all for having me over, and it's a privilege to be part of ELTAI and also deliver this this experiential talk. I wouldn't say that I'm well on any particular theory, but then it is from my experience that I would like to talk, base my understanding of how to use drama praxis or how to use drama texts in the classroom with the sole purpose of bringing about a change in language competence, acquisition competence, and also enhancement of whatever language that they have. Now, most often, at the outset, let me also tell you that I'm not going to use any PowerPoint presentation. I'm just going to talk because theater is a very direct and a very, what shall I call it, on the face kind of an interaction. So I don't like any medium or any kind of mediation with technology, because that's not the done thing in theater, because it is one of those very ancient communal arts. And I'm trying to exploit this communality or this communal feeling in order to develop language skills in my students. So the oft-repeated complaint that most of us teachers of English face, the criticism that all of us face is, why are your students not employable with regard to communication skills? And I think all of us have got terribly annoyed with this constant criticism that is aligned at our profession. What are you doing in classes? Why is it that students are not able to communicate after so many years of learning the language? Why are they still unemployable? Especially with regard to communication skills. Why are they not able to express themselves with regard to, at a job interview or at group discussions? Or why are they not able to write lucidly? Why don't they have that felicity of expression? So these are questions that have troubled me for a long time. And I feel that one of the reasons is this problem of silence that is there in the English classroom. how often do we allow our students to interpret text with regard to their personal experience, with regard to their memories, with regard to their lived context? And how many times do we allow, or how often do we allow students to interpret text with regard to shared experiences? What I mean is universal experience. It's not just the personal experience, but the universal experience. So it brings me to the fact that we need to change, we need to tweak the pedagogy for English studies. Isn't it time to establish a new virtuous cycle in the classroom by getting students to own the meanings of texts through a look at their own lives and experiences? So therefore, it becomes the universal experience. It becomes the shared experiences or the shared lives that all of us as human beings are bound to have. Now, I've been aided in this process of participatory experiencing of the text. I would like to use this phrase, participatory experiencing of the text, from two different angles. One is from the point of view of the student. From the student's perspective, it means producing meanings in a dialectical relationship between the textuality of the text and her or his experiencing of it as an individual reading subject. From the teacher's point of view, or from the teacher's perspective, it is a process of working cooperatively with the learners to help them change their understanding or misunderstanding. That intervention to change, or creating a context of learning that encourages students to engage with the subject matter. So the constant or the given is engaging with the subject matter. And that engagement comes when they are able to take ownership of their learning. And that happens when there is a relationship between what they learn, the text that they learn, and the ability to embed it in their own experiences or in their own lives or shared living. So therefore, to contextualize responses through interaction, the pedagogy would need a compelling reason to ignite the questioning, re-evaluating or evaluating, and sometimes also subverting the meanings determined by texts and by various other readers. That is where I understood the concept of praxis, borrowing from Paulo Freire, where praxis is defined as an encounter of the theory and the practice as learners transform the learning into action-oriented responses. So that is how I understand the term praxis, the encounter between the theory and the practice. And how does it transform the lives of students? So therefore, praxis as a mode of classroom enterprise could use a mode of drama praxis. In other words, what I mean is, when I say drama praxis, it means a manipulation of the art form of theater during rehearsals and production of plays to derive challenging interpretations by questioning or even subverting established meanings. I'm looking at this concept of multiplicity of meanings. A text does not give us just one single meaning. It is not based on the dogma of objectivism. So can people make their own meanings? Can it be understood from the point of view of reader response or the reception theories, where there are multiplicity of meanings? A text can mean so many different things to different contexts, people living in different contexts, people living in different time zones or time spaces. So that is what I want us to understand when I look at the term drama praxis. So it is not an accurate transmission of the prefabricated drama text on the page to the stage as a finished product to be sold to captive audience. That's not what I'm looking at. So when I talk about drama praxis, especially to exploit the possibilities of language learning or interpretation of texts, what I'm looking at is the process of rehearsals and the process of production of plays, whereby meanings are understood, meanings are made, and multiplicity of meanings are made. And that's what makes me understand drama praxis as an educational tool to learn the nuances of negotiating meanings by personally engaging with the text, reflecting on the meanings that are made and transforming their learning into effective responses to leave the world much richer and stronger than before. I would like to look at one example. I would also like to give you, there are any number of, now this particular concept of drama praxis is also couched in not just the reader response theory, but also in the communicative language teaching approaches, or even the communicative language learning theory, where the teacher is there by the side of the students and understands or also demonstrates the ways in which meanings can be arrived at, in a very gentle, in a very covert manner, rather than being self-imposing or being overtly there in amidst all their discussions. So one of the texts that I took was a very ancient text where the worldview is about the man taking charge of the situation and the woman simply obeying or simply submitting to whatever the instructions that the man had to give. So I took this text to class and I told them, read the text. They read the text, and then the next question was, find the spine of the play. Now, before I begin on this process, let me also tell you that I'm not going to perform. I'm not going to give you any techniques for theater. There are plenty of theater exercises and theater games whatsoever on the internet. My doing that will be a duplication, will be reinventing the wheel that has already been invented. I don't believe in duplicating work. I'm only looking at how this process of drama praxis can be exploited in the classroom with regard to meaning making. How do you allow, or how do you make your students come to the process of meaning making by just giving them a text, by looking at a text? And also, how do they bring about a transformation in their lives? So before this process, you can do a lot of theater games, you can do the mirror exercise, or you can do the voice modulation. All that is time consuming, and you can't just have just a few minutes to do all that. I would like to invite all of you to my theater classes for a hands-on experience of all these things that I do with regard to stagecraft or theater craft. But right now, I would like to emphasize on making meaning as an important process of learning the language, learning how to express oneself clearly, and how to be confident about that expression. Because ultimately, it's confidence that we need to help our students have, and with confidence comes a lot of natural expression that they own, and the meanings that they make, and thereby become good at expressing the language. So the first question that I ask is, what is the spine of the play? Or in other words, simplifying it a little bit, what is this play about? Now, it is not a pre-established or a preconceived notion of the text that I need. So if somebody were to act smart and tell me, oh yeah, this play is about the problems of patriarchy in a world that is not familiar to us, I would say that no, that is a very informed reading. What is the spine of the play that you are interested in? Or what do you think is the spine of the play? Or, in other words, what is the central strength on which this play resides? So, and then the next question is, would you like to change the spine of the play? Would you like to have another spine, or would you like to recreate a spine? So just go ahead and find out. So there are two ways in which they can do it. They can either change a character or they can change a situation. In class, when I did this, they changed the character. So they wanted the woman to be a little more strong, a little more proactive, a little more accountable, rather than just submitting to whatever was told to her. So there was a character shift. There was a change in the character. So they were adapting this particular play and making the woman in the established text much more strong, much more confident, much more accountable, much more responsible for her own actions or for whatever she said. So if the character had to change, then there were one or two situations that had to be changed. So it was both the character and the situation that were changed, and it came through with a consensus building. So what I introduced was everything has to be discussed in the group, in the class, and then you have to figure out how you build a consensus with one another. So there was a lot of give and take, there was a lot of negotiation, and all along I sat by the side, and if somebody went overboard from the point of view of aggression or from the point of view of not taking someone else's perspective or somebody else's understanding, I just told them to be a little more gentle, be a little more understanding. So there was this process of consensus building all through. The second was, then the consensus that was built was, can we make this woman a little more strong? Can we make her a little more accountable, and let her have the character of a woman who thinks and who implements her actions based on her thought process? So I asked whether the entire class agreed upon that, and that's when there was a consensus building. So always when you build a consensus, there is always a give and take. There is always a group that will say, well, no, this is what is the established text, or this is what is the established meaning. Whereas there are some others who are brave and say, well, let's move on, let's change it. And that's what I mean by subversion. All right. So it's not just interpretation, it is also subversion of the meaning, going against the grain of the text or going against the established notions of the text. So after the consensus was arrived at, the second process was they had to find the gap in the text by simulating situations, for which I divided the class into 5, and I asked them to give me 5 different situations. The possibility was to enact it, have a small skit, and enact incidents or anecdotes from their personal lives or from their reading of how women or even girls are not given a fair deal, either in society or in homes or in communities or even in at their workplace or even in their study environment. So there were these 5 groups, and you won't believe it, there were 5 different ways in which they brought about this concept of women not having an equitable rationale for their existence. So there was group one that spoke about the bias towards male siblings with regard to food, clothing, shelter, education, and employment opportunities. The second group spoke about crimes of dowry through ruthless or even subtle forms of domestic violence, neglect, deprivation, and psychological stress. Group 3 spoke about harassment of women at work, underlining the vicious connection between silence and exploitation. Group 4 spoke about women as non-inheritors of material wealth and property, and therefore negligible degree of economic security and self-empowerment. The fifth group spoke about contribution of women in the family and society that show no visible creation or procurement of wealth. So let me again remind you that this was from their lived experiences, from their realities, from their context, social context, maybe not personal, because I didn't ask for anybody to talk about their personal life. It could also be from their reading, from their understanding. So nobody spoke about their individual problems, but then there was a universalization of experiences. And if you look at these 5 groups and what they had to say about women being accountable, or women not given a chance to be accountable for as human beings in their existence in the world, you realize that all these are based on not just anybody's one single personal anecdote or experience. There is a universal criterion involved. So the option was make a skit and act out or enact this particular idea that you have grasped through simulation or simulating the context. Again, don't worry. I do not want anybody's personal details or personal information. Try to make it fictitious, use fictitious names so that no identity is not revealed and everybody is safe. But then because we are looking at issues, we are not looking at people, we are not looking at groups or communities at large. The third step was to transpose this particular text, the text that they had created. Could they have transposed or extrapolated this particular new text that they had created to the established text, to the text that I had brought to class? So therefore, there was a change in the situation, there was a change in the character. This was done, and language changed, language of the text, which was not very modern, not very contemporary, that changed. It was their natural language that they used. I wouldn't say very high-flown expressions, very simple language, because the main concern for me was how well are they able to express the meaning that they have arrived at with regard to the role of women in society, with the role of how are they able to transfer or transmit the meaning that they have made for themselves as a result of looking at lives around them or the society that is there in front of them. So once the transposing or the extrapolation of this new text was done into the established text, the entire language changed, the entire tempo changed, and then I told them, why don't you put all these situations together and then create a new play, create a new skit. So that established text was forgotten, and then there was this new skit, there was this new play that they enacted, each one taking charge of what they had to say and also what they had to express. So that is the final part of this experiment that I conducted, the drama praxis that I conducted, where there was a final presentation of the text and the defense of the new text. Now, over here, it's not just the final presentation of the text, but it was also, at the end of it, they had to answer questions that were raised by the audience. Now, what was transformative was the confidence that these students had. This entire process took about, I think on the whole, it took about one whole semester where they were able to deal with this problem of owning the text, owning the meaning, understanding what they were saying, and also being able to express themselves. So at the end of it, they were so convinced, they were so what do you say, sure of the meaning that they had made for themselves, that they were able to express themselves with a lot of confidence, with a lot of proficiency, with greater proficiency than what they started off with. So through the process, I was talking to them, I was helping them out in helping them to understand where they had gone overboard, where they could pull it down a little bit, where this concept of negotiation of meanings or transaction of meanings could be made. So they were on their own at the end of it when they answered the questions. The questions were so many, and many of them could answer these questions. Sometimes there was this process of the language not being very good, but then, as my guide always has told me about, my guide, Reverend Dr. Francis Peter, who's always spoken about interlanguage. That was an interesting concept for me. This was the process of interlanguage, and definitely when that confidence is there and when they have arrived at the meanings that they've made, the interlanguage will certainly move on to a language where they are confident, where they are able to communicate and they are able to express themselves really well and in a very, very proficient manner. So this is the way in which I have structured drama praxis, and I've done this from 2009 up to 2019. Now, through this, there is this preparation for the final production. So that's why I feel the rehearsal is as important as the final production. I'm not a person who pays a lot of attention to the final product. For me, the process is absolutely important, because it is in the process that a lot of learning takes place, where they are talking to one another, and I ensure that they speak in English and but then when they gained a lot of confidence and when they owned the meanings that they were making, there was a lot of language that flowed out of them. So the rehearsal is very important. In drama praxis, the rehearsal is the most important process for language learning. And I would give a lot of importance, a lot of credit to the process involved during rehearsals. And it is during rehearsals that they learn how to negotiate meanings with one another by taking the consensus, building a consensus, and also arriving at a final solution. And even though I was by their side, I told all of them that they could agree to disagree. They could there were no, one of the games that I played, or one of the theater games that I played, is no leader. So any activity that was given to them, there was no group leader. For example, these procedures that I mentioned, the 4 procedures that I mentioned, I insisted that there is not going to be a leader, because in theater, everybody is a leader. You have to take personal responsibility, because I always believe that uh, theater is a very, very um, treacherous medium. Because if you're not honest, if you're not hardworking, if you've not thought about the process, or if you've not given it its full attention, it can expose you to to ridiculous to a ridiculous extent. So absolute preparation with a lot of honesty, with a lot of integrity, and uh, allowing that meaning to grasp the core of your being, so that you're convinced about what you're doing, you're convinced about how you want to express yourself and what you want to express yourself. So this is why the process is important. The rehearsal is absolutely important. Uh, Innumerable exercises with regard to theatre craft. I've had a process of scene setting, which I picked up from the National School of Drama, New Delhi, in the course of my research, where I divide the class into 4 or 5 groups, and I ask them to present a scene in its most natural setting. So the scene could be, if the play is about a rural setting, so the scene could be divided into 3 or 4 parts. Um, an early morning scene in a rustic home, or a mid-afternoon scene in the paddy field, or a late night event or a festival that the community is involved in. So breaking the rural background or the rural setting into 4 or 5 uh, substrata, and then allowing the students to enact it, set the scene as realistically as possible, for which they would have to do a lot of research, for which they went into their own lives, many of them from rural backgrounds, and that's when they became one with the text, one with the exercises that were given to them. So there were people from very rural interiors of Tamil Nadu who were able to give a lot of suggestions, and it was incredible the pride that they had in convincing the others about, this is what is done in my home early in the morning, or this is what is done when we have a temple festival, or when we have a church festival in our village. And the person acting out the way in which the chariot was drawn, or how the temple was opened, and the devotion of the devotees. So it gives them a lot of happiness, it gives them a lot of joy, it gives them a lot of pride in sharing their contexts, those contexts that are not familiar to many others. So I have that is scene setting. So for weeks together, there are people on campus practicing with holding on to bags of vessels, or costumes, or anything that uh, that are contextualized to that particular scene or that particular setting. So on the day of the scene setting, I invite my staff members, my colleagues, and my special friends, and ask them to evaluate how true is it, how have they been able to capture uh, this particular life that uh, I have told them. So they become the evaluators, and I corroborate their evaluation by looking at it myself and then uh, uh, evaluating it. So this process, now this scene setting is also flows into the final production. I see to it that there is a correlation between the scene that they set and the production that they are uh, visualizing. So it is a concept, it is a process of visualizing what they want their audience to see, how convinced they are about what they want the audience to see, and the meaning. So in my drama classes, I tell them that every line that you say, not just every line that they say, everything that the audience is able to see makes meaning. There are hidden meanings, there are open meanings, there are open ended meanings. So, the manner in which you tie your hair, the costuming that you do, the makeup that you put, or even the properties that you use, all pass on a message to the audience. So make sure that you do your research and find out how best you can convince your audience. This is the process of drama praxis. So not only are they imbrued with the meaning of the text, they also convince the audience and the others in the class about how they have owned their learning and how they've learned this process of making meaning in a drama class. So this is what I wanted to share. I hope I have not um, gone off too much with regard to time. Deepa, can you tell me, do I have some more time?
Ma'am, please go ahead.
Okay. So thank you for that. Now, this is a process that can be done in the literature classes, English literature classes, and in the English language classes. In the English language classes, we have this concept of English language proficiency through those 4 skills. Now, through the process of my research, I always told myself that there are actually 5 skills. The 5th skill is embedded in all the other 4 skills, and that is thinking. How do you make your students think? And through the process of thinking, how are they convinced about what they listen to, what they speak, what they read, what they write, and how they express themselves? So drama praxis in a way is helping people to also think out strategies, think out ways and means by which any text can make meaning, not just to themselves, but also to the audience beyond them. Now, the acid test in all this is in the use of drama praxis is where they face questions and they have to defend, or they have to look at ways and means by which they can talk about the meanings that they've made as a result of their enactment or their presentation. So it is not just, once again, I wouldn't give too much of importance to the final product. The final product is, is a matter of fact, or it is incidental. But what is important is the process. The process or the journey towards reaching that goal is absolutely important in drama praxis. And this process can be used when you teach literature texts, literary texts, and also texts that are there that are used for English language classes in the English language classroom. I remember an incident. In Women's Christian College, we have this streaming of students according to their proficiency levels. And once I took up the challenge of teaching the fundamental level. The fundamental level is a level where the proficiency level is absolutely negligible. They do not have any proficiency in English, and it is with a great struggle that they string one single sentence in English that makes meaning. And all this, I went to class and I found it very difficult, absolutely challenging. Now, I what I told them was, I asked them, what happens during Pongal? How do you celebrate Pongal? It was a spoken English class. It was speaking skills that I was teaching them. And when I gave them a context that all of them are familiar with, before that I made sure that all of them know what is Pongal, what they know this particular festival, and that they have celebrated it at least once in their lifetime. I made sure about all that, and then I asked them what happens during Pongal. So they were stunned that they imagined that I did not know about this festival. And I played up to the gallery and I told them, well, I haven't gone to a village and celebrated Pongal. I've celebrated Pongal in my house in the city, but I want to know what you people do celebrating Pongal in the village. I've heard that it is great fun. There's so much of happiness and joy. Tell me what you do. And that's when so many of them, this was a class of about 20 to 25 students, and each of them told me a different idea. And what I told them was, one person cannot repeat what the other person has said. If somebody says, well, I wear new clothes, the other person cannot say that. You have to make it different. And I also gave them the option to enact. So when somebody enacted, they came on to the podium, they came on to the teacher's area, they mimed whatever they did. All right. So when they mimed, I asked someone else to narrate the enactment. So that is another process that I tried out, which was greatly appreciated and which gave me a lot of returns, gave me the outcome that I was interested in, and that is language proficiency. So again, this is the process of shared experiences, lived realities, and lived experiences that they were trying to present to me, who they imagined was an outsider, outside that particular experience. And what I told them was, you have to convince me, you have to tell me that, there is this fun and excitement, and there is this hope of prosperity and joy and community feeling. All this, I want you to show me what you do. So this is the process. This is what I relate to as doing and understanding. And drama praxis gives us a lot of leverage for us to do in order to understand. So they did this particular process of what happens during Pongal, a village scene or a village background during the festival of Pongal, and how they brought it to life, and how they were able to convince me that there is a lot of joy and happiness, and there is a lot of community feeling, and they convinced me to such an extent that I was convinced enough to go and take part in Pongal festivities in a village next time. All right, so that is the conviction that we need to arrive at. The confidence with which they were able to convince me that about the gaiety of the festival. So what I'm looking at is their contexts and their lived realities. Are they able to, with the use of the language, are they able to convince, are they able to express themselves? So as a teacher, you're making your own notes. what is the learning that has happened with regard to listening, with regard to speaking, with regard to reading, with regard to writing. So you can have all these four skills and the embedded skill of the thought process by making your own notes and by understanding whether the skills um, have been what's the best word? The skills have been captured and effectively got or embedded within themselves. So, and I'm sure once they get that confidence to express themselves, either through their reading or through their writing or through the listening or through the speaking, then much of our battle is won. And I have the confidence to say that I've met with a lot of happy moments in this process of drama praxis while teaching English language and literature, starting from 2009 up to 2019. And 10 years is not a joke. If I hadn't got the outcomes or if I hadn't realized the objectives of language proficiency, I would have given it up long ago. But I'm absolutely excited about this medium or this process of using drama praxis with regard to language learning. So I'm not looking at theater, using of theater, but one of those definitive techniques of theater craft or theater arts, which is called drama praxis, where there is this meaning that is arrived at through consensus, and where the theory of the text is in collaboration with the practice through the performances, where finally there is a transformation that takes place. All right, so that is what is very exciting. And in the process of drama praxis, there are any number of language in any number of theater games or theater exercises, voice modulation. If I have time, I can, even probably demonstrate some of those language exercises or theater exercises that I do in class. One of which is voice modulation. There are these various techniques of voice modulation. There are these alphabet faces that you need to do. The objective of this is for pronunciation and enunciation. I tell them to go out to hardware shops and buy a small jumper. In carpenter's language, we call it jumper, a wedge, a small wedge, wooden wedge. Or if they do not have a wedge in the times of pandemic, please don't go to hardware shops or anywhere outside. Just take a pencil. Let me pick up a pencil. Oh no, I have a pen over here. Yeah. I keep my pen like this, and then try to carry out a conversation. It's very difficult. Why? Because you have your tongue and you have your this that stays between what you need to talk about, and you just don't have a free hand at all. Now, the reason why I make my students do this is to help them enunciate the end consonants. It's difficult. Most of us, all over India, there are various problems. Dr. Shirish Chaudhary and so many others have gone into such a lot of in-depth research about the various ways in which most of us either swallow the end consonants or the medial consonants or the initial consonant, whatever. So there are these problems. one of those problems that can be rectified is by keeping this jumper between your jaws, between your dentures, and then talking. So the consonants are clear, enunciation is very clear. The second is after I finished that. So what I tell them is in class and at home, talk to yourself, look into the mirror and talk to yourself. Carry on a conversation with yourself in English, and let's see whether your pronunciation and your enunciation improves. The second is voice faces or vowel faces. So, how many vowels are there? Veena, is it time to stop?
A couple of minutes more.
Okay,
ma'am.
okay, done.
Yeah.
So these vowel faces where you have how many vowels are there in the English language? Okay, you get the answer. Now make a face, A. So don't just make a nice pretty face, make a distorted face. A, E, I, O, U. So make all these funny faces, and they have a whale of a time looking at one another, not realizing that they are funny themselves. And as a teacher, I initiate the process to break the ice, as it were. So I make all these funny faces and I say, nobody must repeat the faces that I made. So you make your own funny faces. And there they go and they create havoc in the classroom. I've got shouted at by the principals, various principals, and by various heads of departments, and I tell them, this is the process of language learning. I can't help it. So give me a separate room. So they end up giving me a separate room, and I carry on, and then all hell breaks loose. That's what it is. You need to shed their inhibition, and with regard to language production. So after language phases, then I talk to them about the consonants. How do you pronounce the plosives? Pa, ba, ta, da. So again, none of these should be repeated. What my face should not be repeated, because you have your own brain and you know how to make it powerful. Okay, so this is the way in which language becomes better. They become a lot more confident about language, the enunciation and pronunciation of language. Although that is a very small segment with regard to drama praxis. Drama praxis is a lot, as how I have interpreted the process of drama praxis is the process of meaning making in order to transform lives for themselves and for the community at large. Thank you very much.
Ma'am, thank you so much for that wonderful session. We always thought that the text, the drama, the text of the drama is the play is something that cannot be violated. You cannot take off from there.
No,
But,
no. The birth of the reader is the death of the author.
Exactly. So you reminded us of how the drama text can be used just as a springboard for a lot more creative activities, and how students can be involved in creative reinterpretation of the text. It was a fantastic talk, ma'am. Thank you so much. Can we take a few questions, ma'am?
Yes. I hope I can answer them.
We'll read out the questions and then we'll see. Sir,
I'm just broadcasting the question.
yes. We have plenty of questions, ma'am. People have already been posting a lot of questions in the chat box.
This is getting me nervous.
But we'll probably take 3 or 4 questions.
Veena ma'am, can you read the questions from the chat box?
Or shall I just pick some of them and read them out?
Please. Any.
Okay. lot of comments.
Such as, just give me some idea. Oh, it's there in the chat box.
I have broadcasted one question.
Yes, sir, I'm not able to see the question. You have broadcast. Is it possible to use theatre with learners with very limited proficiency? When their proficiency is very limited, they are unable to engage in meaning making with the prescribed text in a literature program. So, what to do in such situations, ma'am? Moreover, I would like to know how to motivate the literature students to read the primary text without resorting to online summaries.
Yeah, nice questions. So many questions in that. The first thing is, I gave you that example of how I managed to be convinced about Pongal, how they enacted it, and somebody was able to say it. So when I use this particular syllabus for language learning, something that I've told my department is I want learners with very limited proficiency. Once in a while, people who are interested in theatre craft also come in, the very advanced learners. And what I've found is, although I was very nervous having this kind of a mixed ability group, what I learned was they learned from each other a lot. The advanced level learners learned so much more. I mean, and horizons are widened. So you can have a class with very limited proficiency levels or even with mixed ability groups. It's not at all an issue. It's how you as a teacher should devise, should do a lot of homework, a lot of preparation. I've sat till 4 a.m. in the morning trying to devise exercises to pitch it at their level. It is not one size fits all at all. And that is why using theater is wonderful, but at the same time treacherous and also absolutely challenging. It is the most unpredictable forms of teaching, because you can never be sure of the outcome. So the teacher has to be on her toes and his or her toes, and when I went to England for one of those IATFL conferences, they spoke about the limbic system, which is somewhere in the center of our brains, which helps us to think on your feet. And that's why I love to use the medium of theater. The constant use of the limbic system. You're thinking on your feet. On the spur of the moment, you have to come up with various options, which you should have thought of before entering the class. You cannot go into a theater class, or if you're using theater for language learning purposes, you cannot go into class without preparation. You have to be on your toes, and you have to also start activating the limbic system in your brain. I forgot the next question. What is it? Yeah, the primary text. See, what I would like to tell you is, this is one of those complaints that all of us have. These days they don't even come reading the text. Well, can you ask them to find out what the text is about and how does it relate to their personal lives? And can you ask them to write a story about their personal story or their personal understanding of this particular text? I'm sure they will come up with fantastic interpretations or meanings. Let's not dampen our spirits and the spirit of the student by saying that, well, they just don't. If they don't, part of the blame is ours. We have not allowed them the freedom to think on their own. Are we interested in only in the students arriving at one single meaning per text? Not possible, especially in today's postmodern world. What is the meaning of what is the point in arriving at one single meaning? So you have to open up, as long as they don't go overboard and it's not too far-fetched and it's not totally different. That's where you as a teacher should step in.
There is another question. How can we incorporate the theater exercises in the online mode? I thought that was a very relevant question for today.
Yeah, I wish I had, some more time. During the pandemic, see, the last time I did a theater course, an in-person theater course was in the year 2019. And then the next time round, we couldn't do it. It was an online thing, but I still managed. I simply did not know how to do it, but there was a lot of thought that I put in. There was a lot of suggestions I got, and somehow I managed to do it. And I'm planning to write a paper on that. Give me some more time, and I'll give you those ideas.
I think maybe we can take one more question. There's one person who has asked, how do we finish syllabus along with theatre practice when we need to teach poems and essays?
Yeah. Well, you don't need to teach only theatre. You can teach this process of meaning making even in poetry, even in fiction, even in short story. You can use, you do theatre, you do this entire semester, you can do 3 or 4 plays. You can break it up into groups. So you have 4 plays on your syllabus, 4 groups do it according to the module that you have prepared, according to the procedures that you have prepared. But one limitation I must confess is that if you're going to use theatre, please remember not to have an ambitious syllabus of 25 plays and 30 plays. For what reason? If you teach them one single text and teach them how to interpret it, how to make meanings, how to look at critical material and then subvert the meanings and make new meanings, you are giving them a life skill. They can do it on their own. You don't need to teach them every text. And that is a misconception that most English literature teachers have, that they are the sole repository of meanings and that the meaning resides only in them. No. Every student is a palimpsest who comes with his or her own intelligence and understanding. And literature is life issues. So what are we teaching them? They need to teach themselves. You're there by their side.
Ma'am, thank you very much. There are plenty of questions. I think everyone has a question, but we may not have the time to take all of them. So maybe we can pass around an email or something so that they can send their questions and we can answer.
Yeah. Veena, you can share my email ID with, you have it, you just share it with them.
Sure, ma'am. Sure. Okay. Ma'am, thank you so much. It was a very, very enlightening session. We learned a lot of new things about how to use drama techniques in class. In fact, I learned a new meaning for the word praxis today. It was a very interesting session. The way you did the experiential talk, it was we could relate to the experience in the class, and there were so many lessons that we can take to our class. I think as English teachers, all of us in the audience have benefited from your talk. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Veena, Dr. Deepa, Dr. Shravan Kumar, Vinod, Dr. Mohan Raj above all, and so many others. May LTI go from strength to strength. Thank you very much.
Dr. Shravan, it's over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. It's time for the announcements. The certificates will be sent to only LTI members and the students, those who have attended the entire session. And our next session will be held on the need for thinking out of the box. So do register for that, and we'll be happy to see you in the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.